I need to introduce Becky now. Becky Willis is Professor in Practice at Lancaster Environment Centre and an expert lead for Climate Assembly UK. And that's the National Citizens Assembly commissioned by Parliament. Becky, it's great to have you with us. We look forward to hearing what you have to say. Over to you.
Hi, thank you. Well, thank you so much for the invitation, and thank you, Clover, for a really brilliant introduction. And I'll pick up on some of those themes, especially this relationship between individuals and the system in what I say. So as Graham said, I research at Lancaster University, and what I look at particularly is what governments need to do to tackle the climate crisis. And I've just published this bright orange book called Too Hot to Handle, if you can see that, which covers this issue. So what I'm going to talk about specifically today, what I've been asked to speak about, is about how you as young people and as schools and teachers can make a difference to the way politicians think and can make a difference to what government does on climate change. That might seem an impossible goal, but I'm going to argue that it's a very, very realistic and necessary goal. Let me start by telling you a little story. So as part of my research, I did lots and lots of interviews with members of Parliament in the UK. And I was once speaking to a local politician, and he told me about the proposals for a new road that were being put forward in his local area. And he said he didn't want the new road to happen. He thought it would be much more important to invest in cycle paths, in public transport, in walking and cycling. And one of the reasons he thought this was because he didn't want to increase carbon emissions in the local area. But he said to me that he didn't want to use climate change as the reason for arguing against the scheme. He didn't want to keep going on about climate change, as he said, because he was worried that there was no public support for that. That as soon as he started talking about climate change and carbon reduction, that people would then not agree with him. They wouldn't give him their support. And he wasn't an isolated example. A lot of the politicians I spoke to were worried that there wasn't enough public support for the climate action that we'll need to see if we're going to tackle this crisis. And so this was really interesting to me because, we know from research that people are concerned about climate, but that message wasn't getting through to politicians. Now, one thing that changed that quite considerably was the school strikes. And since the school strikes, MPs have realised that there is a concern for climate, not just amongst people who join organisations like Friends of the Earth or Greenpeace, but in every school, in every classroom, and in a huge number of families, there are people who are thinking about this, concerned for their future, and who want to communicate that. And in this case, who want to protest, who want to strike from school. And to give you a specific example, there's a member of Parliament called Layla Moran, who was so moved by her local school strikes that she asked for a debate in Parliament about climate action. And that debate was one of the main things that led to the government implementing a more ambitious climate change target, which Parliament voted on last year. So that was a direct link from the school strikes through to changes in politics. And so it is both possible and necessary, I think, to be having this discussion all the time with our MPs and with our local politicians. So for the rest of my talk, I want to focus on very specifically on what you can do to try and influence politicians. And the main thing that you can do is get in touch with them. You can write to them, you can do a petition, you can invite them to your school. By far the best thing you can do actually is have a conversation with them. Now, at the moment that conversation would be online or over the phone, that's absolutely fine. But I would really encourage you to make it a conversation rather than a a one-way just writing to them and saying what the problem is. So when I talk to people about this of all ages, not just young people, whoever I talk to about this, they have three sort of concerns about working in this way: that they don't know enough, that it's sort of too difficult and political, and thirdly, that it is more important to change your own life. So let me just run through those. On this first point, that you don't know enough to have a conversation with a politician. Personally, I wouldn't worry about that at all, because what politicians want to know is what your views are, what you're worried about, what you're passionate about. And they don't necessarily look to you to have all the answers. They can do some of that work. They just want to know that you're worried enough about something or passionate enough about something to go and see them and talk to them. And the best thing you can do, as I said, is to make it a conversation. So, ask to speak to your MP or your local politician who in the local council, the people who run your local area, and tell them you're worried about climate change, and then ask them, well, what do you think? Are you worried? Is this something that you think about? What have you done so far to tackle the climate crisis? What has your party done? What has your local council done? What has Parliament done? So ask those questions and then use that as the beginning of a conversation that you can explain what your concerns are. So the second problem is that people think it's sort of too difficult or too political, that they should steer clear of politics, if you like, that they should instead, just do work within their own school or within their own household or community, and that they shouldn't do this really difficult or maybe too radical political stuff. Well, what I'd say about that is that all you're asking of politicians, as Greta Thunberg reminds us, is to act on the science. So what you're doing is to put the science in front of politicians and hold them to account, ask them what they're doing about it. And this is your future that they're talking about, and it's absolutely right and not at all controversial, really, that you want to talk to a politician about your own future and the future of young people and all of us on this planet. So I would say it's not at all political. In fact, it's deeply scientific. The third thing, and this comes back to what Clover was talking about, is this question of whether it's actually more important to do things in your own life, to take action in your own life, rather than just complaining to politicians. Now, what I would say about this is that it's absolutely vital to make those changes in your own life to the extent that you can. So I pledged to go flight free this year. I haven't flown for a number of years. It's actually been easier than I thought it might be this year. We've cut back a lot on the meat we eat in my house, even though one of my children complains about the lack of sausages. We've done these things at home, and that's really important. But what I would say is that to give all the things that you do in your own life, in your own community and school, that extra boost, the best thing that you can do is to then talk about them to other people, but also talk about them to politicians. Because if you have a conversation with a local councillor or with an MP, and you say, you tick off all these things that you've done in your own life, that shows how passionate you are and how seriously you take this issue. And that really helps to boost your message. So I would say it's not at all an either or. Do you protest and do political stuff and talk to politicians, or do your own stuff? I would say categorically it's both, and you need to do both of those things. And that gives what you're doing in your own community that sort of extra boost, that extra power. So that's the main things I wanted to say. I'm really happy to talk to you about it. Before I go, I'll just point you to a brilliant organisation called Hope for the Future. This is a booklet that they published on how to contact their MP. But if you Google Hope for the Future, you'll see that they have a lot of really, really excellent resources on all the practicalities about how to talk to politicians, how to set up a meeting, even how to find out who your MP is. So I'd really recommend that as a source. And if you have more questions about that, then I'd be really happy to answer them. Thank you. Okay, well, thank you so much, Becky. I think that you will have very much helped those who are already thinking, what can we do about this, with some great ideas for where they can go. So there's some fantastic
suggestions there, which we'll be able to come back to. But the main message I took from that is really we need to make sure that we're taking every opportunity to speak out with confidence and say that they must act on the science. Thank you so much, Becky.